This episode is brought to you by HP Plus. In a world full of smart devices, isn't it about time your printer got smart too? Now printing is smart with HP Plus, and the HP Smart app is how it all happens. You can print from your phone with just a tap, no matter where you are, even from your garage/home office/yoga studio. Huh, that is smart. HP Plus. Learn more about smart printing at hp.com/smart.
History That Doesn't Suck is a bi-weekly podcast delivering a legit, seriously researched, hard-hitting survey of American history through entertaining stories. If you'd like to support HTDS or enjoy some perks, like ad-free early releases or patron-exclusive mini-episodes, please consider giving at patreon.com/History That Doesn't Suck. To keep up with HTDS news, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. It's just past 9 a.m. on a warm, clear summer day, August 8th, 1885. 12 pairs of black stallions slowly trot up Broadway in New York City. They're pulling a massive, ornate, black catafalque, upon which rests a black coffin, shaded by a black canopy. 20 generals advance ahead of these magnificent steeds. At their front is the aging, salt-and-peppered, former Democratic presidential nominee and Union General, Winfield Scott Hancock. He's mounted, of course, on a black horse. Behind all of this, the rest of the funeral procession is so large that it chokes off the whole of Broadway for miles. Indeed, other than these solemnly advancing feet, hooves, and carriages, densely populated Manhattan has come to a standstill. All of New York is in mourning. The whole nation is in mourning. Ulysses S. Grant is dead. Oh, Ulysses. It was only last October when the 62-year-old former commander of the Union Army finally agreed to see a doctor about his sore throat. It turned out to be cancer. Had a lifetime of cigars finally caught up with the blue-eyed general turned U.S. president? It's a question that many do and will yet ask, but perhaps his biographer, Ronald White, answers this best. It did not help. Upon diagnosis, U.S. Grant's mind immediately turned to ensuring he didn't leave his family destitute. With very generous terms from his good friend turned publisher, Mark Twain, he raced against the clock to write his memoirs. And he won that race. Unconditional Surrender Grant, as the Union warrior was known, completed his masterpiece of prose and Civil War history at a cottage in upstate New York only days before surrendering the Ghost on the morning of July 23rd, 1885. And today, on August 8th, doleful church bells ring from sea to shining sea. But it's not just the bells that lead me to say all of America mourns. Not even the astounding 1.5 million grieving Americans now flooding Manhattan streets and the balconies, windows, and roofs of its black-draped buildings. Impressive as both of those aspects are, I find it particularly noteworthy that Americans from every corner of the nation and of every stripe are here to pay their respects. More than 80,000 march or ride in the funeral procession. Sure, this includes bigwigs, like the only two surviving former U.S. presidents, Rutherford B. Hayes and Chester A. Arthur, as well as the current U.S. president, Grover Cleveland, with his entire cabinet. Senators, congressmen, and governors are here too. But their numbers are dwarfed by the 8,000 municipal leaders who've traveled from all over the United States to walk in the memory of Ulysses S. Grant. Tens of thousands of those in this procession are military, but I'm not just talking about active units. Many are Civil War vets. The one-legged general, Daniel E. Sickles, rides at the head of 18,000 who once fought and bled under Ulysses' command. They marched with him in life. Now, they march with their former commander to his grave. It's hard for observers not to get choked up. That's particularly true when they see these aging soldiers are joined by their former foe. It's a haunting yet healing sight. Gray-clad, and now gray-haired, ex-Confederate units, like the famous Stonewall Brigade, march in honor of the Union commander. It's quite befitting for the man whose presidential campaign slogan was, "Let us have peace." His family knows that, and that's why they made sure Ulysses' honorary pallbearers represent both North and South. These include his beloved generals, Philip Sheridan and W. Tecumseh Sherman, but also Confederate generals Simon Bolivar Buckner and Joseph Johnston. Joe's traveled all the way from California to be here. Yet, Ulysses' fervent desire for healing never conflicted with his commitment to equality for Black Americans. So it's no surprise that many Black veterans proudly march in this procession as well. Indeed, Black communities across the nation are heartbroken. Ulysses was both the general who won the war and the president who fought for their rights during Reconstruction. One formerly enslaved man, whose shoeshine station happens to be along the mournful parade's path, honors Ulysses with a simple but powerful sign. It reads, "He helped to set me free." Ulysses' good intentions as president didn't help Native Americans as he wanted, and he deeply regretted his ill-conceived effort to stomp out wartime smuggling by singling out Jewish Americans. But God, the man learned from his failures. Perhaps a testimony to that is the presence of two other mournful figures accompanying this procession. Ulysses' still loyal Seneca aide-de-camp, Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Ely Parker, and Rabbi E.B.M. Brown. Yeah, Ulysses was no more perfect than any of us, but he truly tried to do right by all. No wonder every segment of America, regional, racial, religious, you name it, is in mourning. To quote Frederick Douglass, "In Ulysses S. Grant, the Negro found a protector, the Indian a friend, a vanquished foe a brother, an imperiled nation a savior." Close quote. Hours have passed. Finally, in the afternoon, the horse-drawn catafalque and its accompanying generals come to where Riverside Drive meets 122nd Street. Warships fire salutes in the harbor as the black coffin is taken from the black catafalque and toward a brick tomb. Just as a bugler signaled the end of the day for Ulysses and his soldiers countless times during the war, so now a lone, single bugler sounds the end of Ulysses' days by playing taps. Our 4 honorary pallbearers, 2 Union, 2 Confederate, flank the coffin. W. Tecumseh Sherman, or just Comp, as Ulysses used to call him, is shaking. The aging general's usual nerves of steel have abandoned him. Tears flow freely down Comp's wrinkled, bearded cheeks as his dear commander and friend, the hero of Appomattox, is laid to rest. Goodbye, Ulysses. An era has ended. Not only is Ulysses S. Grant gone, so is his world. This is no longer the predominantly agricultural United States into which Ulysses was born. Just looking around the very city his funeral procession marched through proves that. Buildings keep stretching north. Trains full of passengers and goods are multiplying. The impressive Brooklyn Bridge spans the turbulent East River, and Edison Electric has a power station bringing electric lighting to Lower Manhattan. It's clear that money and power no longer reside with the landed gentry. It resides in these increasingly taller downtown buildings, where tenacious titans of industry are carving out their own economic empires. This is the rise of the Gilded Age's tycoons, the robber barons. Welcome to History That Doesn't Suck. I'm your professor, Greg Jackson, and I'd like to tell you a story. It's time for us to meet some of the most powerful figures in the history of the United States. And no, they are not politicians. Having power through a military or political career is just so passé. In the Gilded Age, power is having your own economic kingdom, or at least a fiefdom. Hence the term these semi-royals don't appreciate very much. I'm talking about the robber barons. Now, we can't meet them all, so I'm choosing to introduce you to 2 of the most fascinating, 2 tycoons whose wealth could buy all the gild adorning the Gilded Age, John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. We'll follow their rags to riches stories as they take over entire industries, oil and steel respectively, and forever changed the American economy. And while we'll save most of the backlash for the episode after this one, we'll also get a taste of that as we recall the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 and experience up close the Homestead Strike of 1892. So let's get started by meeting the man behind Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller. His story begins in the mid-19th century, so you know what we have to do. Rewind. It's the 1850s in any town, USA. Probably somewhere in Ohio, but I can't say exactly. Historical records of what's about to happen speak in generalities rather than specifics. What I can tell you, though, is that a roughly 6-foot-tall, handsome, broad-chested, blue-eyed man is about to make this community his next mark. The traveling salesman, or herbal doctor, as he prefers to call himself, has many interesting wares, but he really loves to hawk pills and elixirs. He even claims his quote-unquote medicine can cure cancer. I know. The irony is especially disturbing given this episode's opening. Anyhow, he sometimes reels in his victims, customers, by making up warnings about the potency of his products. You might think that scares people off, but it's actually quite effective. One neighbor will later recall, he would warn them solemnly that they must not be given to a woman in a delicate condition, for they would surely cause abortion. Thereupon, he would sell his pills at a higher price. Yes, the harmless brown-colored elixir is now moving almost as quickly as the salesman will once he's got these good people's money in his pockets. Sorry, not salesman. He bills himself as Dr. William A. Rockefeller, the celebrated cancer specialist. William, aka Big Bill, or better yet, Devil Bill, is the quintessential 19th century snake oil salesman. What he's doing is perfectly legal in the 19th century United States, but the legality of it doesn't make it moral. Not that Bill cares. He's not one for integrity. The man cheats regularly on his devout Baptist wife, Eliza, and in 1855, the 42-year-old salesman becomes a bigamist with his illegal marriage to Canadian teenager Margaret Allen. Neither Eliza nor Margaret know they are sharing their traveling husband with the other. In short, Bill is a confidence man, a con artist, and a proud one at that. In his mind, this is how the world works, and the sooner his children realize that, the better. Case in point, a decade back, the handsome, charismatic con would open his arms to his toddler son in order to entice the boy forward. Once the child committed, Daddy would step away and let the little one faceplant on the floor. Basically, it was an antitrust fall. The message was, don't trust anyone. As the child grew, Bill reinforced that, explicitly telling him, never trust anyone completely. Not even me. That child is John Davison Rockefeller. Bill's dishonest ways place quite a burden on John. To say he comes from an impoverished background is a slight overstatement, but it is true that his mother never knew how much money her con-man husband would or wouldn't provide. This means Eliza and the 6 kids see lean times, and John will be somewhat of a rags-to-riches story. Thus, as the oldest child, John helps to carry the household through odd jobs and selling candy. The blue-eyed teenager with light brown hair will later recall that, under his thrifty mother's tutelage, I was raised to work, to save, and to give. But the lad wants more. He tells one of his boyhood friends, someday, sometime, when I'm a man, I want to be worth $100,000. And I'm going to be too, someday. And it's around his 16th birthday in 1855 that John D. finds himself somewhat pressed into pursuing a full-time job. It seems his father can't afford to let him finish the last 2 months of high school. Is this because Devil Bill's second secret marriage is tightening up his finances? John's biographer, Ron Chernow, certainly thinks so. But regardless of why, that's the situation. John must find work. It's September 26, 1855, in Cleveland, Ohio, and John D. Rockefeller is on the job hunt. For 6 weeks now, The rail-thin, 140-pound teen has gotten up 6 days a week at 8 a.m. and spent his entire day looking for employment. Marching all over under the hot Cleveland summer sun in a pressed, clean suit, John wants something big, something that'll truly distance himself from his unreliable con artist father. Even the mere suggestion from his pops that maybe he's looked long and hard enough and should just come home sends a chill down John's spine. So, day in and day out, he continues going to Cleveland's railroads, banks, and wholesale merchants, all industries that have blossomed in this large city of 30,000, asking the top men if he can put his recently completed $40 3-month-long education from E.G. Folsom's Commercial College to use as a bookkeeper. This morning, John decides to try his luck down on the docks. He walks into the Merwin Street office of wholesale merchants Hewitt and Tuttle. Inside the 3-story brick building, junior partner Henry B. Tuttle actually gives John an interview. It goes well enough that he invites the lanky youth to come back after lunch. Returning that afternoon, John meets with the senior partner, Isaac L. Hewitt. Isaac's a big deal. He owns a lot of Cleveland real estate and helped found the Cleveland Iron Mining Company. The local business legend looks John up and down. He puts the teen's penmanship to the test. A bookkeeper can't very well have poor penmanship. Finally, Isaac makes up his mind. He looks at John and says, "We'll give you a chance." Elated, John hangs up his coat and gets right to work. For the rest of his life, John will celebrate September 26th with far more gusto than his own birthday. He'll call it Job Day, the annual celebration of starting down his career, a career that will ultimately lead him to become the most successful capitalist the country has ever known. John is a diligent bookkeeper. He works day and night, but after 3 years, he decides to go into business for himself. Joining forces with a friend from his brief business school days, an Englishman named Maurice Clark, 18-year-old John becomes a co-owner of Clark and Rockefeller in 1858. The duo's Cleveland-based merchant business is an enormous success, and the nation's coming Civil War will only make their services all the more necessary. As a New York-born Ohio transplant, John is a Northerner through and through. He votes Republican, supports Abraham Lincoln, the Union, and even abolition. That last one is so important to him, he's even helped purchase the freedom of 2 enslaved souls. John claims he wants to fight. He'll later report that, quote, "I wanted to go into the army and do my part," close quote, but he doesn't dare risk his newly established business. Thus, the rising business star sends substitute soldiers instead. As the war rages, however, John and his partner are growing interested in a product that seems to be on the rise. It's called oil. See, the American Civil War is changing the entire landscape of the country, even the lighting industry. Still well over a decade away from Thomas Alva Edison's electric light, the nation relies on the North's whale oil and the South's turpentine to light their lamps, and the cost of both has skyrocketed. So Americans are turning to a new source for lighting their homes at night: kerosene. A product of refined oil that burns long and bright, these wartime realities are making kerosene catch on fast. Meanwhile, oil itself is also pretty useful to lube up other industrial booms, including the railroad. Hence, in 1865, the congressman and future Dark Horse president, James Garfield, writes to a former staffer, "I have conversed on the general question of oil with a number of members who are in the business, for you know the fever has assailed Congress in no mild form. Oil, not cotton, is king now in the world of commerce." And wouldn't you know it, the oil fields just happen to be booming in the very state this future president and John D. Rockefeller call home: Ohio. So as the Civil War carries on, John and his partner Maurice take on the latter's brothers and a chemist named Sam Andrews to form a new company and enter the oil business. But the mustachioed, tall and gangly Ohioan isn't worried so much about drilling. Ever a shrewd businessman, John knows that the real money is found in refining the oil into kerosene, petroleum jelly, gasoline, and other byproducts. The partners set up their own refinery, called Excelsior Oil Works. Maurice Clark's ill-tempered brothers prove a problem, however, and when they claim to want to break up the partnership, John catches them off guard by taking them at their word. Using an auction to settle the dissolution of the company in March 1865, recently married John gladly outbids the Clarks. And with the chemist Sam Andrews standing by his side, well, John is nothing but ascendant. By December of 1865, he owns 2 refineries in Cleveland. More will soon follow. As John acquires more and more refineries, and with them more and more power over the industry, others begin to worry he's creating a monopoly over oil in the United States. And with the incorporation of his new company, Standard Oil, in 1870, well, John is poised to do just that. It's a snowy afternoon, December 1871, in Cleveland, Ohio. Colonel Oliver Payne is sitting and waiting in one of the city's preeminent banks. The colonel is a well-to-do big shot in the oil industry. Frankly, his firm, Clark Payne & Company, is only second to John Rockefeller's, and the competition has sown a bit of enmity between them. So the only thing more surprising than John asking for a sit-down with him is that the Civil War vet has agreed to it. John walks into the bank at their agreed-upon time, 3 p.m. The gangly Standard Oil founder explains that he wants to see the Cleveland area oil refineries merge. John contends that there are far too many refiners, and that's causing overproduction by small-time hacks with inferior product. It's damaging the industry, he asserts, so merging is necessary if they are to survive. Naturally, he has a suggested banner for this grand unification. His, Standard Oil. There's another element here, too. The newly formed Southern Improvement Company. While its name makes the Southern Improvement Company sound noble, it's really an umbrella under which the New York Central, Erie, and Pennsylvania railroads are ending their squabbles over shipping prices on oil. This will set uniform rates on all lines. Meanwhile, the SIC will also jack shipping costs up, then provide rebates to select refineries. In other words, the SIC will undercut free market principles by making sure refiners not in the club are stuck paying double to ship. In short, this is an oil/railroad cartel, and John Rockefeller is on the inside. Good God. Big as Clark Payne & Company is, does it really want to go up against this machine? John asks the colonel, if we can agree upon values and terms, do you want in? The Union veteran contemplates the situation. He gives a tentative yes, contingent upon examining John's Standard Oil ledger books. When he sees them later that day, the colonel's jaw drops to the floor. Standard Oil's numbers are stunning. He concedes. John acquires Clark Payne & Company for $400,000. The valuation is quite a stretch, but money isn't the concern. Winning is. He gladly agrees, and in doing so, 31-year-old John Rockefeller just became the world's biggest oil refiner. Nor is John done. Between February 17th and March 28th of the following year, 1872, Standard Oil buys out 22 of Cleveland's other 26 oil companies. This means the world's largest oil refiner also controls over 1/4 of all refineries in the United States. Now, is John picking up distressed companies with generous offers? That's how he tells it. The devout Baptist claims to be an angel of mercy for refiners that would go under anyway because of Standard Oil's superiority. He overpays, then brings the seller on as a Standard Oil exec, just as he did with the colonel. Or is he pressuring and unfairly breaking smaller competitors, then forcing them to accept their fate as mere feudal lords in his growing empire? His critics say it's the latter. Although the SIC never goes into play because word of the nefarious plan produces such a national outcry that the state of Pennsylvania revokes its charter, it's quite a coincidence that John's 22 acquisitions happened during the few months this threat existed. John will later assert in lawsuits that he never mentioned the SIC during talks with sellers. Probably true, just as it's true his offers were generous. But none of this is mutually exclusive. Sellers likely knew about the looming threat the SIC posed to them and rationally saw they had little choice but to bend the knee and kiss the Rockefeller ring. While it's impossible to ever know exactly how nefarious or innocent these dealings were, The press calls it a ruthless takeover. They dub John's mere months-long acquisition of almost every Cleveland refinery as the Cleveland Massacre. And yet, the Gaunt Baptist businessman isn't done. Over the next several years, John acquires most of the refineries in other states as well. The devastating financial panic of 1873 that I described during our introduction to the Gilded Age in episode 91 leaves the smaller ones ripe for the taking. By 1875, John controls most of Pennsylvania's refineries and begins a takeover of the oil business in both New York and West Virginia. No one expected this from the son of a traveling snake oil salesman. Of course, deeply religious John attributes his success to God. I believe the power to make money is a gift from God, to be developed and used to the best of our ability for the good of mankind. Having been endowed with the gift I possess, I believe it is my duty to make money, and still more money. And make money he does. Even the Vanderbilts take notice. The famous, if not infamous, Cornelius Vanderbilt, aka the Commodore, in a nod to his domination of steamships before conquering New York railroads, has long been the king of American capitalism. He's the OG of business tycoons, if you will. No one ever dictated terms to him, until he dealt with 4 decades younger John D. Rockefeller. The Commodore's son, William Vanderbilt, astutely predicts, quote, "He, John, will become the richest man in the country." Close quote. Yes, he will, and when he does, he'll be dethroning the Vanderbilts. But he's not there yet. First, John has to do battle with a few major railroads. Their war begins with the invention of a new weapon, the tank car. Fearing that oil is being refined faster than the already expensive barrels in which they're transported can be made, John invests in railroad cars that are effectively a massive tank of oil. Once developed, Standard Oil outfits all the main railroad cars it uses, the New York, Erie, Pennsylvania, and so on. John now owns the very cars the railroads are using. He even charges them when they use his cars to transport oil from competing refineries. Combine that with the new pipelines John is developing so he can cut out the railroads altogether for Standard Oil's victory over the railroads. After all, between the size of Standard Oil and now this tank car/pipeline infrastructure, the railroads need John Rockefeller more than he needs them. Line after line capitulates to the oil tycoon taking over their oil shipping operations, including Cornelius the Commodore Vanderbilt's New York Central. There's just one major holdout: Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania. Tom. He and John have history. Tom Scott was a part of the Southern Improvement Company plan to get Standard Oil better prices, but now he sees the monster he helped create. Hoping to wrest some power from Standard Oil's monopoly, Tom and his exceptionally long sideburns rely on the Pennsylvania Railroad subsidy run by Colonel Joseph Potts, the Empire Transportation Company. The Empire has some of its own pipelines and tank cars, and the idea is that if they can transport the oil from smaller refineries using their own materials, Standard Oil's monopoly will slip, thus leveling the playing field. But that's not how John Rockefeller sees it. He goes ballistic. Here, I have gone out of my way to be friendly to the Pennsylvania in the allotment of oil shipments, and now you gentlemen are permitting your associate, Colonel Potts, actually to invade my field? Why, it is nothing less than piracy. You must call off this poacher. Tom doesn't give in. So John goes scorched earth. In the spring of 1877, the gaunt Ohioan stops all Standard Oil shipping on the Pennsylvania Railroad. And that's smarts when 2/3 of the oil transported on the Pennsylvania comes from Standard Oil. He idles his Pennsylvania refineries and starts pushing Cleveland production to make up the difference. In short, John, who has no public security holders, knows he can bleed longer than the Pennsylvania can. Sure enough, John's right. Tom Scott makes cuts, and when his employees in Pittsburgh have already been dealing with the economic downturn still at play since 1873 and other cuts in recent years, well, they hit a breaking point. In July, we get the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. I detailed this strike to you in the open of episode 91. Trainmen refuse to let goods ship. The National Guard is called in. Confusion reigns. Some shots are fired. Civilians and children die. And the people respond by putting the flame to the Pennsylvania's property, ultimately destroying 39 company buildings, 104 engines, and over 2,000 train cars across 3 miles. And now you know that one of the layers behind the cuts that led to this strike and the 40 deaths that followed was Tom Scott's power struggle against John Rockefeller. And John won. Now he controls all shipping on all the railroads. And as any fan of the Monopoly board game knows, that's always a winning strategy. By the end of the 1870s, John controls over 90% of oil production in the US, and he can transport it at any reasonable rate he wants. Basically, he's a king. But like the once untouchable Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller will yet find there's someone who can quite literally give him a run for his money. Ironically enough, that challenge will come from the mentee of his vanquished foe, Tom Scott, a Scottish immigrant by the name of Andrew Carnegie. But to appreciate Andy's rise, we need to dial back the clock one more time. Here we go. Rewind. You hear that? That's the sound of my Sleep Number 360 smart bed adjusting into more of a lounge chair position so I can read in ridiculous comfort while in bed. And that's not all it can do. There's a different preset position for watching TV, relaxing, or sleeping in 0G, and of course, we have partner snore. Yes, if my wife starts snoring in her sleep, one little tap on my smartphone and her side of the bed will gently raise her to an incline that won't disturb her slumber, but might help me get to mine. Okay, let's be honest, she'll probably use that one on me before I'll use it on her. In fact, maybe she has. I wouldn't know. Once I settle in with my sleep number set to a comfy 35, it's pretty hard to wake me. Proven quality sleep is life-changing sleep. Save up to $900 on Sleep Number 360 smart beds, plus special financing, for a limited time, only at Sleep Number stores or sleepnumber.com/HTDS. Disclaimer, subject to credit approval, minimum monthly payments required. See sleepnumber.com for details. And now, back to the story. Many of us are walking around with the black cloud of credit card debt hanging over our heads. 40% of Americans are stuck in the cycle of debt because of high interest rates, especially on credit card debt. If you need to break that cycle, Upstart is here to help. Upstart wants to empower you to take charge of that debt and pay it off faster with a low interest rate. Whether it's getting those pesky credit cards paid down, consolidating multiple high-interest debts, or getting a personal loan, Upstart looks at everything, not just your credit score, to find the interest rate that works for you. It just takes a 5-minute online rate check, and you can see what rate they have for you. Loans can range from $5,000 to $50,000, and funds can be transferred as fast as the next business day. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today when you go to upstart.com/HTDS. That's upstart.com/HTDS. Don't forget to use our URL to let them know we sent you. Loan amounts will be determined based on your credit, income, and certain other information provided in your loan application. Go to upstart.com/HTDS. It's a chilly autumn day, 1859, in Altoona, Pennsylvania. While we know Tom Scott will get crushed in later years going toe-to-toe with John Rockefeller, today he's still an up-and-coming employee of the Pennsylvania Railroad. He's just returned home from Philadelphia, where his interview with the Pennsylvania's president, J. Edgar Thompson, resulted in a promotion. Indeed, Tom is moving up, from a railroad general superintendent to vice president. This does mean, however, the sideburn-wearing, thick-haired Tom has to move to Philadelphia. That leaves a lingering question. What will happen to Andy Carnegie? Born the son of a struggling handloom weaver in Scotland, Andrew Carnegie, or Andy to those close to him, immigrated with his penniless family to Pittsburgh back in 1848, when he was 12 years old. They were so broke, Andy had to get right to work, but he quickly moved up from his father's world of textiles into the telegraph game. He excelled here, so much so that when Tom Scott decided he needed his own telegraph operator and assistant in 1853, he offered the gig to the fair-featured, strong-jawed 17-year-old. Andy proved more than capable in the years that followed. In fact, one time, when Tom wasn't around and things got hectic, Andy even took it upon himself to issue orders in his boss's name. In short, Andrew Carnegie has more than shown his worth, and after 6 years of working together, it'll be a real shame for Tom to part with his right-hand man. And understandably, Andy's quite nervous. What will happen to him and his career if his mentor Tom heads to Philly? Well, Tom's invited the young Scotsman over to talk about that very thing. Now a barrel-chested, barely over 5-foot-tall 24-year-old, Andy enters and takes a seat across from Tom in the latter's home. Tom tells him about his interview and impending promotion that will require moving to Philadelphia. There will be other changes too. Tom explains that Mr. Enoch Lewis will be promoted to replace him as general superintendent of the railroad here in Altoona. Andy realizes his future is up in the air. He listens eagerly as Tom continues. Now, about yourself. Do you think you could manage the Pittsburgh division? Is he kidding? Pittsburgh is a major division of the railroad, a boom town with plenty of business. That was Tom's job when the two first met. Some pretty big shoes to fill then. Andy answers, I think I can. Well, Mr. Potts is to be promoted to the transportation department in Philadelphia, and I recommended you to the president as his successor. He agreed to give you a trial. What salary do you think you should have? Salary? What do I care for salary? I do not want the salary, I want the position. It is glory enough to go back to the Pittsburgh division in your former place. You can make my salary just what you please, and you need not give me any more than what I'm getting now. You know, I received $1,500 a year when I was there. Mr. Potts is receiving $1,800. I think it would be right to start you at $1,500, and after a while, if you succeed, you will get the $1,800. Would that be satisfactory? Oh, it will. Tom just doubled Andy's salary. On December 1st, 1859, the young Scotsman is officially appointed superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad's Pittsburgh division. Not bad for an immigrant whose family has struggled at the bottom of the increasingly industrialized textile economy. But Andy's not done yet. In fact, he's just getting started. Unbeknownst to Andy, his move to Pittsburgh is going to put him in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. As we know, the impending Civil War makes the railroads even more important than they already were. As a staunch Northerner, Andy pulls out all the stops, using the Pennsylvania Railroad to transport all sorts of food, goods, and soldiers for the Union Army. And it doesn't hurt that the Union is going to spend a lot of money in the process. Like John Rockefeller, Andy makes enough money to send soldiers in his place instead of fighting when the draft comes calling in 1864. He also takes on the title of capitalist as he uses the money earned as superintendent of the Pittsburgh division to invest and create more business in the industrial city. He forms companies based around oil, locomotives, and railway cars. But his most important of these companies comes in 1865. This is when he leaves the Pennsylvania Railroad and forms the Keystone Bridge Company. Here's a little background. Back when he was in Altoona, Andy noted the Pennsylvania Railroad using iron to build bridges. They were so superior, the short businessman reported that, I saw it would never do to depend further upon wooden bridges for permanent railway structures. Andy wants in on the action, and with the help of other investors, including Tom Scott, he forms a company that, in 1865, reorganizes with a nod to the Keystone State nickname of Pennsylvania as the Keystone Bridge Company. The company sees success building bridges right out the gate, but its most notable bridge starts in 1867. This is the St. Louis or Eads Bridge. With the support and investments of his Pennsylvania friends, J. Edgar Thompson and mentor Tom Scott, who, together, could secure a long-term lease through their railroad, Andy backs the building of this, the first bridge to span the mighty Mississippi River. Notably, Chief Engineer Captain James Eads uses pneumatic caissons in the process, which is a first ever in the United States. Though our friends the Roeblings from episode 92 will do this on a larger, scarier scale with their Brooklyn Bridge. But iron isn't quite strong enough. They have to go with something stronger. Steel. That's a problem, though. No one is currently mass-producing steel in the strong, durable quantities needed for bridge construction. Costs soar as the St. Louis Bridge is delayed and not completed until 1874. All of this is a disaster for investors, but that's not Andy's takeaway. He sees that there's a whole lot of money waiting for whoever can mass produce and manufacture steel. Andy might not be Superman, but this man of steel is ready to meet such a challenge. It's a Saturday in early September 1875. We're just outside Pittsburgh in Braddock, Pennsylvania, at the newly opened Edgar Thomson Steel Mill. Let's head inside and check it out. Amid the smoky air, foul smells, and sweltering heat, workers place several tons of pig iron into what can best be described as a gigantic bowl-shaped furnace. The iron melts and is then poured into a Bessemer converter. This pear-shaped, brick-lined steel container is enormous and can hold several tons of molten iron. At this point, steam-powered blowers shoot hot, pressurized air into the converter, thus causing a chemical reaction that purifies the molten iron and decreases its carbon content. The molten iron has now become molten steel. Workers then tip the suspended Bessemer converter, thereby pouring its contents into long, rectangular molds, called ingots. Immediately, the new steel beams are moved via railroad cars to the nearby rail mill, where they're cut and pressed into the most perfect, durable rails anyone in the railroad